Welcome to our colleagues and friends here in the CAARI Library and online, and thank you for joining us for our lecture series. I'm Lindy Crew, CAARI's director, and it's my pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ellon Souter, who is our current Edgar Peltenberg Fellow in Cypriot Prehistory at CAARI. Ellon undertook her MPhil at the University of Cambridge before coming to the University of Manchester for her PhD, incidentally under my supervision, and she was awarded her doctorate in 2023 with a dissertation entitled Not Set in Stone, Understanding Community in Prehistoric Cyprus Through Groundstone Tool Biographies. During her studies and since completing her PhD, Ellon has become the foremost expert in the groundstone artifacts of a number of periods, and many of us are grateful for her expertise. Most importantly, her research focuses on the social aspects of these objects, integrating changes and continuity within assemblages to wider archaeological narratives. She has published several articles on her research on material from excavations in Italy and the UK, as well as Neolithic to late Bronze Age Cyprus, and has several more publications forthcoming. Ellon also has extensive field experience in the UK and has been a valued member of my team at Chrysonogus Gallia for many years. She's currently also the groundstone specialist for Chlorocast Paluras and the Western Cyprus Survey, amongst other projects. It has been a delight having Ellon here as part of the CAARI community as the Peltenberg Fellow. And I would now like to invite Dr. Souter to present her lecture entitled Changes in Groundstone Technology Related to Early Copper Use in Cyprus. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Lindy, for that wonderful introduction. Today, I will be presenting aspects of my PhD and postdoctoral research concerning groundstone tool changes related to early copper use in Cyprus between the Middle Chalcolithic to Early Bronze Age periods. This talk has several aims. I will bring together strands of my previous research, summarize trends in the groundstone tool industry over the period under examination, relate these changes to developments within the copper industry, but also to intra-island changes and relationships with the mainland. My focus will be on what groundstone tools can tell us about mechanisms through which copper developed in Cyprus. Groundstone tools have material peculiarities and roles in human lives, which give them the potential to tell us specific things about the past. There is a common misconception that groundstone, due to its name, is only created through or used for abrasion. However, groundstone tools are crafted through a wide range of techniques, including splitting, flaking, pecking, and grinding. Tools are defined as objects that are used in the production of other things. They offer a special kind of technological interconnectedness, as they are made through stoneworking techniques, and they are used in a diverse array of techniques to process a large range of materials, from wood to copper and foodstuffs to pigments. I have provided a list here to give you a sense of the diversity of industries that they can shed light on. Most groundstone tools are made, used, and techniques of crafting and operation are learned within the domestic environment. Although groundstone tools were traditionally considered to be relatively constant over space and time, with detailed analysis, they proved to be very culturally specific. Unlike some artifact classes, they are made from durable materials. As well as telling us about organic industries that do not survive, they hold traces of their crafting and use, so are particularly appropriate for a life history approach. Groundstone tools have been connected to the uptake and development of copperworking industries in Cyprus. However, these connections largely consist of comments here and there, and their relationship to copper has never been adequately explored. To outline developments in Cyprus over the Middle Chalcolithic to Early Bronze Age period, which are relevant to this analysis of groundstone tools, it is necessary to firstly introduce issues in our understanding. These problems arise due to the history of archaeological research, combined with the occupation of the North, which has prohibited archaeological investigations in this area since 1974. Early archaeological work on this period prior to the 1974 invasion focused on copper-rich Bronze Age burial contexts from the north of the island. Although these are significant for our understanding, they offer a limited repertoire of funerary offerings. Furthermore, it is difficult to assess changes as tombs rarely preserve the same sequences in the same way as settlements. A small number of early Bronze Age settlement sites have been excavated, which are dotted across Cyprus. A key site is Marcialonia in central Cyprus, which offers the most extensive evidence for settlement dating to the earliest Bronze Age Philia phase. Due to this, it has become the key site for understanding changes which take effect from the start of the Bronze Age. In contrast, the Chalcolithic is largely understood through the thorough excavation of settlement sites located in southwest Cyprus conducted after 1974. Limited exposures of Chalcolithic period sites have been excavated in other areas of the island. In the end, we have a situation whereby the Chalcolithic is best understood in the southwest and the early Bronze Age from Marcyalonia in central Cyprus. Furthermore, it is hard to judge how directly comparable these different areas are. The first copper-bearing objects occur in Cyprus in the Middle to Late Chalcolithic period. There is not a huge repertoire recovered, but these generally consist of ornaments, engraves, and tools in settlements. They occur earliest at Rimi Pambola and Soutera Kamanodia, so Rimi and Soutera, in the Middle Chalcolithic, and they spread into the Lember cluster sites of southwest Cyprus in the late Chalcolithic period. Several of these copper-bearing objects have traces of tin, including 6 faience beads from the Middle Chalcolithic and 4 tools from the late Chalcolithic. As far as we can currently understand, tin is not present in Cyprus, suggesting that these artifacts or some of the metal that was used to make them was imported to the island. Faience is not widely known at this time, with the closest occurrence of this material found in the South Levant. Similarly, one of the objects from the late Chalcolithic period has a high tin content, leading to its classification as a proper bronze. Bronze is also limited in its distribution at this time, only being found in the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the South Levant. Although some copper objects of the Cypriot Chalcolithic may have been made from cold hammered and annealed native copper, analysis shows that others have trace elements more consistent with being smelted from ore. Recent analysis suggests an Anatolian source for the copper used in some of these objects. Overall, the current evidence indicates that many Chalcolithic copper objects represent imports. In contrast, Peltenberg made a case for indigenous experimentation in copper production at Chrysogonous Philia due to the presence of copper objects, scraps, and potential crucibles. He suggested that early interest in copper developed from elaboration of the ornamental industry. Notably, cruciform figurines and other ornament types increase in number over the Middle Chalcolithic period. As well as picrolite, other materials were increasingly sought out, including various other types of stone, as well as bone and shell. Although many objects were likely made of pebbles of picrolite, which could be collected from the Kouros River, the presence of raw slabs of this material at Siskulio in a settlement suggests that groups were reaching into the hinterland, following river valleys up to sources in the Troodos. Notably, this would have required them to travel into the copper belt. He suggested that it was during these trips that groups would have encountered copper ores or copper-using communities. Peltenberg related the elaboration of the ornamental industry over the Middle Chalcolithic to increasing social differences and competition. He envisioned aggrandizers who sought out novel materials for ornaments to be used in prestige display and exchange. He saw this as emerging from earlier developments over the early to Middle Chalcolithic transition. At this time, groups seemed to move from living more mobile lifestyles to having greater residential stability. Whereas production seems to be shared between households in the early Chalcolithic, it is privatized within the house in the Middle Chalcolithic. This allowed for the amassing of household belongings and accumulation of surplus, leading to social differences. These social differences of the later Middle Chalcolithic seem to continue into at least the earlier part of the late Chalcolithic. The faience beads with traces of tin from the Middle Chalcolithic provide the greatest evidence for mainland contact in this period, with little other evidence of influences from beyond Cyprus. Mainland influences is seen from the start of the late Chalcolithic in the Lemba cluster sites of southwest Cyprus, and it seems to increase over this period. Alongside copper, ceramics, ornaments, and tomb types seem to take influence from mainland styles. Several developments can be seen within the copper industry in the early Bronze Age. A much larger collection of copper objects occur, and alongside tools, potential weapons are found. The first evidence for the use of Cypriot copper ore occurs, suggesting that these ores were being smelted in Cyprus, and molds indicate that casting was taking place on the island. The emergence of the Cypriot Bronze Age has been a matter of debate since it was first investigated, which is particularly evident within Stuart and Dickios's contributions to the Swedish Cyprus expedition publication. Frankel and Webb put forward the most comprehensive and widely accepted narrative on developments over the late Chalcolithic to early Bronze Age transition. Their theory is largely formulated from their intensive excavations at Marcialonia in central Cyprus. They initially suggested that key divergences in materials, animals, and techniques between the Chalcolithic and Philia period reflect a completely different habitus, which they related to a new ethnicity on the island, seeing this as the result of colonization by groups from Anatolia. Later, they softened their approach by adopting the term migrants rather than colonists. They suggested that some hybridization occurred, but that this was unidirectional, with indigenous Chalcolithic groups largely adopting new mainland ways of life. Innovations of Philia migrants are seen to spread quickly across the island, creating a homogeneous Philia facies and giving rise to the Cypriot Bronze Age. Chalcolithic traditions are viewed as almost completely subsumed by the techniques of these new incoming groups. A series of issues can be identified. Akin to the Chalcolithic period, different areas of the mainland are implicated in these new developments in Cyprus. Frankel and Webb suggest that this is due to the effect of founder migrants and subsequent waves of migration, with the founders facilitating the arrival of later groups. Furthermore, intra-island differences can be seen in the early Bronze Age across Cyprus. This is explained as the development of regionalism from the early Cypriot period. Lastly, they see this move as being driven almost solely by the search for new copper sources. However, settlement patterns do not shift that much between the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age, and several of the tested copper-based objects of the early Bronze Age are also imports akin to the Chalcolithic period. I've highlighted these issues as they are the ones that I want to address in this talk. As we can see, this hypothesis leaves little space for the agency of indigenous Chalcolithic populations in the emergence of the Cypriot Bronze Age. Migrants are seen to arrive in the Philia phase, and they found the subsequent Bronze Age. These developments are projected back in time, with copper objects and other changes of the Chalcolithic period explained as due to the presence of early visitors, perhaps even copper prospectors, prior to more intensive settlement on the island. Furthermore, regionalism from the early Bronze Age is viewed as resulting from mainland contacts being cut off during this period. This leads to the question, are all changes in Cyprus the result of mainland developments? Some key arguments against this theory have been made. Firstly, the previously discussed work of Kaltenberg aimed to show that these Philia developments result from internal mechanisms of change in Cyprus and earlier contacts with the mainland in the Chalcolithic period. In addition, Bolger suggested that Chalcolithic groups were differently receptive to mainland influence, with a decision to buy in or not to novel things being a matter of choice. Furthermore, Bernard Knapp disagrees theoretically with the Philia migrant hypothesis. He stated that hybridization must occur. Even in the case of colonization, it is not a group of colonists and colonized that is created, but a completely new mix of both. The influence of Chalcolithic groups in the formation of the Cypriot Bronze Age still requires further investigation. Having stated the current debates on this period, I will now outline the ways in which groundstone tools have been connected to these changes. The key tool types seen to change in relation to copper are edge tools, consisting of adzes, axes, and chisels. Notably, some axes and adzes are thin and geometric in form and have been suggested to represent skeuomorphs of copper tools. It was stated that by emulating copper objects in stone, stone workers unwittingly resulted in the demise of their industry. This theme of replacement is continued by both Swinney and Frankel and Webb, who suggest that stone tools were completely replaced by those of copper in the Philia period. Furthermore, they explain the presence of these tools in context from the early Cypriot period onwards as representing a renewal in the use of these tools as a reaction to the severing of mainland contacts and reduced use of copper. The groundstone specialist Carolyn Elliott also commented on groundstone tool changes between the middle and late Chalcolithic period. Over this transition, she suggests that adzes, axes, and pestles are increasingly made from visually striking materials, they diversify in size, and are more finely crafted. She linked these changes to the use of these objects in prestige display, seeing this as a continuation of differences that were initiated in the middle Chalcolithic period. However, Elliott's observations were not embedded within wider narratives of increasing social competition in the Chalcolithic period. Franklin Webb also outlined the presence of a completely new groundstone industry in Cyprus from their investigations at Marcialonia. They utilized this to argue for their migration hypothesis, stressing differences with the preceding Chalcolithic collections from southwest Cyprus. Furthermore, they highlighted similarities with other Bronze Age sites to support the spread of a cohesive Philia package. Given the outlined changes and the relationship of groundstone tools to these, several research questions emerge, which will be the focus of this talk. Firstly, how do groundstone tools change over the Chalcolithic period, and how does this relate to copper and mainland contact? Is a completely new groundstone industry detectable from the Philia period onwards, and is this homogeneous across the island? Finally, what does the groundstone industry tell us about the mechanisms through which copper use is initiated and copper industries develop? This presentation results from many years of research in Cyprus. For my PhD, I selected tools from thoroughly excavated settlement sites, but as mentioned before, these are limited in distribution. Case study sites include the middle to late Chalcolithic sites of the Lemba cluster in southwest Cyprus, also including Bronze Age Cassoniga in this region as well, and in the center of Cyprus, Marcialonia. Some other sites were included in a secondary analysis, such as Souter Kamenodia, and I have also incorporated sites that I studied as part of the Western Cyprus survey, which are located in this northwest zone. For my postdoc, I sought out tools from sites located in the occupied north, held in legacy collections in the Cyprus Museum stores. A more varied collection from cemeteries, settlements, and surveys was targeted. The incorporation of the north was significant, as the Chalcolithic period is poorly understood in this area, but also because if Philia migrants arrived in Cyprus, they are suggested to make landfall around Philia or in the Morphew Bay region. Key sites that were targeted are included in this box. Previous studies of brownstone tools in Cyprus largely differentiated between tools based on their forms and broad observations of useware. My analysis aimed to do something a bit different, namely by applying a life history chain operatoire approach. I utilized macro and low magnification microscopic analysis to record multiple attributes from different stages in the life histories of these tools, including material collection strategies, material choices, the presence or absence of crafting, crafting techniques and sequences, uses, maintenance episodes, reuse, and where possible, how tools were deposited. This created more points for comparing industries through space and time. Previously, scholars had largely developed different classification systems for industries at different sites, which clearly made comparisons quite difficult. I created the new classification system based on how closely life history treatments were shared between tools and how they diverged. This allowed for tools from different periods and sites to be compared for the first time. This classification system reveals different qualities of tools, including gestural movements involved in their use, what they were used to process, what they were used in combination with, including composite and parallel parts, crafting strategies, and how these modifications change the form of tools through the tool's life history. The theoretical underpinnings of this project were also inspired by the chain operatoire approach, namely Lemonier's 1992 work on technological change. He states that novel materials, objects, and technologies can only be accepted if they come to cohere with pre-existing ones. Furthermore, I was also inspired by Crellon's 2020 work on change. She suggests that new assemblages enter into and alter pre-existing assemblages, which are already complex and multi-relational. In essence, we should embrace the messy nature of change. So, in the following slides, I'm going to discuss the findings of this research and offer interpretations on the relationship of brownstone tool changes to the copper industry. The next two slides concern changes over the Chalcolithic period, which largely emerged from my analysis of tools within the Lemba cluster sites of southwest Cyprus. From the start of the Middle Chalcolithic period, brownstone tools become increasingly abundant and varied. A range of adze, axe, chisel, and pestle types occur. These objects are always crafted prior to use, and they are generally quite well shaped. Many other tool types show evidence of crafting, including grinding tools. In terms of pestles and mortars, pestles are much more commonly found, suggesting that bases of other materials were used, such as blankets, wood mortars, or plaster basins. Other formal multi-use tools include hammerstone grinders, which are also commonly crafted and were used for facial grinding and crushing activities. Several of these tools exhibit adherence, which suggests that they were used to prepare lime for and polish lime plaster surfaces, and ethnographic parallels exist for similar tools used to this purpose. Notably, a very mixed grinding industry is present in the Chalcolithic period. This includes the use of large rubbers with overhanging terminals, which are used back and forth on saddle-type querns. However, smaller tools are also used in the same motion on querns with ovoid and concave work surfaces. Large and small upper tools can also be used in a circular motion on querns with circular and concave work faces. These three types can be identified through the different shape of work faces and the distribution and orientation of wear. Notably, this specific type of grinding block emerges in the Middle Chalcolithic period here, and it is only found into the Late Chalcolithic, so it's a very Chalcolithic specific type. Some non-crafted percussive tools were used like pestles for pounding materials. However, many percussive tools have distinct pit marks, which suggest that they were used in the processing of hard materials such as stone. Alongside other stone industries, such as chipstone, this likely reflects the above discussed investment in the grindstone tool industry. Moving into the late Chalcolithic, when the first copper objects are found in the Lemba cluster, we see a very similarly constituted grindstone industry to the Middle Chalcolithic. However, a series of changes occur. Firstly, grindstone adzes and axes significantly increase in frequency, whereas chisels slightly reduce. We also see increased investment in the life histories of adzes, axes, and pestles. Although igneous stones are commonly used in both periods, a preference arises in the late Chalcolithic for materials which are greenish in colour and have notable inclusions which give them visually striking textures. In addition, networks of stone acquisition widen. Some objects in the southwest are made from gabbros, with the nearest source of this material being the Dionysos River, approximately 23 kilometres away. Foliated and layered gabbros are also found, which come from the top of the Troodos and are carried down only in the Kouris and Parkotis rivers. The nearest source for these materials is approximately 62 kilometres away. Notably, these are the same river valleys. The Kouris River is the same river valley which Peltenberg suggested was followed to access picrolite and which he linked to an early interest in copper. The dye-based cobbles needed for production of the much larger axes and pestles used at this time are atypical of pebbles available from local beach sources in southwest Cyprus. The proven use of more distantly sourced gabbro raises the possibility that other stones were also being acquired from further afield. Crafting techniques also intensify. Flaking as a technique in the manufacture of adzes is present from the Middle Chalcolithic period. However, this increases in the Late Chalcolithic and is also seen on axes. In contrast, axes of the Middle Chalcolithic period are usually subject to less intensive sequences, such as pecking of the body and grinding of the blade only. Notably, some axes are now made through a very specific sequence of reduction. In the top left here, you can see here. They exhibit rough broken facets over one face, suggesting that they were laterally split. This is not Flaking and splitting are not functional requirements because they require greater investment in subsequent stages, such as pecking and grinding. In addition, adzes, axes, and pestles are more commonly finely ground across their surfaces, like this example here in the bottom left. Again, this is not a functional requirement, as leaving the sides rough increases friction with the haft, and in the case of pestles, friction with the hand. As well as creating a lustrous, smooth surface, this brings out the colours of the visually striking stones that are used at this time. In general, adzes and axes are also crafted to be more geometric in form, with some exaggerated examples of these objects likened to copper tools. Pestles diversify in form with a general trend to having more distinct handles. Much larger axes and pestles are also crafted. The large bottle-shaped pestles share use-wear patterns with each other, which consists of a high sheen which extends up the sides, but little evidence for other heavy use occurs. This suggests that they were utilized to process a large quantity of a soft and oily material, perhaps plant foods. A related development may be the occurrence of large mortars at both Philia and Chloricas Peluris in the center bottom there, which have double bowls, perhaps to act as overspill platforms for the mass production of a specific resource. By incorporating the northerly located late Chalcolithic sites, more can be said about trends in the Chalcolithic period. Although the Middle Chalcolithic is often seen as being more cohesive across Cyprus, largely due to the wide distribution of the picrolite cruciform, the grindstone tool industry suggests that groups came closer together in the late Chalcolithic period. Alongside the import of stones into the Lemba cluster sites, techniques of crafting and using tools are very cohesive across the west and the north. Several distinctive tool types occur between these three areas, including the previously mentioned laterally split preforms, flaked preforms for axes or residual flake scars on finished axes, geometric forms of adzes and axes, typical Chalcolithic multi-use tools, and this distinctive type of grinding block, which was highlighted earlier. Contact networks likely expanded at this time, and these connections must have been of long enough duration to allow for new techniques to be shared. The above described classes of grindstone tools seem to be increasingly connected to Chalcolithic identity. This likely emerged from developments between the early to middle Chalcolithic transition, when privatization led to the amassing of household toolkits and the roundhouse gains in import. As woodworking tools, adzes and axes became increasingly important due to their role in the creation of roundhouses. From the earlier Middle Chalcolithic, certain buildings within house clusters seem to be the focus of adze and axe storage, crafting, or deposition. This suggests that these tools had a role in structuring identities within the home. As well as the much greater skill involved in the production of these tools in the late Chalcolithic, some evidence exists for emergent specialization in adzes, axes, and pestles from the Middle Chalcolithic period, whereby some individuals or groups were creating these tools for a wider audience. This is most evident within Middle Chalcolithic building B69 at Sculiona, which is filled with adze, axe, and pestle preforms, finished forms of these tools, and tools which were likely used in the production of these objects. Furthermore, very cohesive but large collections of tools have also been found from the Middle and Late Chalcolithic at Philia, which also may reflect the work of specific crafters. When we think about specialization, we usually think about standardization. However, what we see here is a creative manipulation of stone, suggesting that this was more about novelty than mass production. From the Middle Chalcolithic onwards, people may have gained repute for their skills in the creative manipulation of different types of stones, including the production of adzes, axes, and pestles, but also figurines and ornaments made from picrolite and other stone types. Furthermore, tools made from visually striking materials, carefully crafted by specific individuals, could have also displayed the social reach of their owners, akin to suggestions offered for ornamental industries of the Middle Chalcolithic. It was suggested by Peltenberg and more strongly advocated by Klinkenberg that some buildings were intentionally destroyed in the Middle to Late Chalcolithic period. As well as being filled with other objects before destruction, these buildings often contain grindstone tool collections. Ritual deposits have also been identified at later Middle Chalcolithic Philia, but this is largely due to the presence of figurines in these deposits. I believe that other socially and symbolically charged deposits exist, which have largely been ignored as they predominantly contain grindstone tools. Closed caches of grindstone tools have previously been considered as long forgotten tool stores. However, from the 4 settlement sites investigated, over 300 tools were left behind from 19 closed caches. And bear in mind that this does not include objects which were found clustered or spread over floors, before building abandonment or renovation. Some of these stores were opened, but the objects were not retrieved. Similar tools are deposited in subsequent building phases, indicating continued need for tools of these functions. And these caches are often referenced in later practices. The tools most commonly found in these caches are those which are invested in over the Middle to Late Chalcolithic period. Two distinct cache types can be identified. Firstly, many caches contain adzes, axes, and preforms for these tools. These are usually deposited in early building phases, and I suspect that they relate to relations formed in the founding of a new house. They could reflect donations from the individuals who came together to aid in roundhouse construction. Other caches contain multi-use tools, such as pestles and hammerstone grinders. These could have also had a role in producing materials for building, construction, and renovation, but they also may relate to the preparation of pigments and food for communal events related to the ceremonialization of the house. To illustrate some of these points and highlight the uptake of copper in the Lember cluster sites, I will now outline some specific settlement sequences. The enigmatic early late Chalcolithic Pithos house and associated buildings at Chalcolithic Philia is the context through which Peltenberg argued for early copper experimentation. Here I present a schematic of the stratigraphy of this sequence. At the end of its use life, the Pithos house was filled with artifacts, including many grindstone tools, and destroyed by burning. It is in the following occupation. So this is the destruction, and this is the following occupation. It was in the following occupation of its burnt shell that the evidence for copper experimentation occurs. However, before this occurred, a very large cache was found associated with the earliest phase of occupation. This cache contained 23 adzes and axes of many different types, which were crafted and used in different ways, with some modifications not typical of the settlement at large. It includes one object made from non-local gabbro, and the large number of objects suggests a plurality of donors. Notably, one of the only two potential copper tool skeuomorphs from the site were found within this cache, whereas the other was placed directly above it in the final use of the building. A cache was also found associated with building 834 from this phase. In contrast, this cache contains a cohesive collection of objects. The 12 axes are all similar in appearance, notably being modified shortly before they were deposited to have flattened butt ends. Furthermore, 3 laterally split preforms previously discussed were also recovered from this cache. This may indicate that this collection was amassed by an individual renowned for the creation and maintenance of stone axes. Notably, objects from these two caches bear incised notches, which are not clearly related to the function of these tools. A single incised notch is seen on one axe from the B834 cache, which could represent a crafting mark. This is also found on an axe of similar form in the Pithos house cache. However, the Pithos house cache contains a second object with an incised notch type, with a double incised notch, which is not seen elsewhere in the settlement. This could indicate donations from 2 different crafters, one of whom might have occupied building 834. Another small cache is found akin to the Pithos house cache in the back quadrant of subsequent building B706. A copper chisel is found beside this cache, and evidence for copper experimentation occurs to the left of this deposit. It is also notable that another copper chisel and copper scraps are found in building 834, which, as previously discussed, could be the home of a crafter, a stone crafter. This could indicate that stone workers, instead of being duped out of their livelihood, were relatively active in the uptake of copper. After these buildings went out of use, a cluster of 3 replacement buildings are founded. The only copper adze or axe found from the sequence was left behind on the floor during the Philia phase of these dwellings. At Chalcolithic Philia, stone industries flourish and widening contacts are seen contemporary with the first copper objects, but copper versions of adzes and axes, a copper adze or axe, postdate the evidence for elaboration of these industries. Furthermore, the possibility exists in this context that large caches of stone, adzes, and axes are slowly replaced by the deposition of individual tools made from copper. It is also important to note that most of the copper objects recovered from the settlement were found in these buildings. In contrast, other households within the settlement seem to continue previous traditions. For example, Building 1 was intentionally destroyed with over 50 groundstone tools, and Building 493 contains an axe cache. In the case of Gisonagamos Philia, it is possible that receptivity to early copper is different at the intrasite scale. Moving on to Lemba-Lacus, in the earlier late Chalcolithic period, a quite sophisticated building cluster is found, with the groundstone industry indicating that different activities were undertaken within different buildings. Building 14 contained a cache or cluster of 31 axes, adzes, and preforms. Several of these objects are thin and geometric, with one having flanged sides, and these have been likened to copper tools. Widening of contact networks is suggested from the presence of pestles made from different types of distantly acquired gabbros. At the end of their use life, these buildings are also burnt. The 2 copper objects from the site are associated with this phase. A blade was found in the door blocking of B3, and a chisel was found associated with a cluster of 6 adzes outside of this building. These objects were initially interpreted as dropped in the frenzied moments of building evacuation. However, in light of the other deposits discussed, it is possible that the 6 adzes and the copper chisel were placed in activities surrounding building closing. Here we see hints towards social differences and wide-ranging contacts immediately prior to the uptake of copper. Furthermore, copper tools are found in similar locations to or with stone tools. Lastly, we look at Chloricas Pelluris. Here, the earliest copper axe or adze found in Cyprus dates to around 2600 BC. This object was deposited with a similar shaped stone within a jar and left behind when Building 5 was abandoned. That wider trends in stone use preceded the deposition of this object is hinted at by the recovery of the largest type 5 stone pestle thus far found from the Chalcolithic period, which is 47.7 centimeters long. This object was found in the partially excavated Building 6, which directly underlies Building 5. Although the jar is unique, this deposit echoes trends of depositing stone tools in building abandonment, and jars with brownstone objects are known of from earlier periods at Susku and Lemba. An interesting element of the stone axe, alongside others that seem to emulate copper, is that there is little to no evidence for use, which is why I'm calling it an adze axe instead of an adze or an axe, just in case you wanted to know. In contrast, most adzes and axes were functional objects with evidence that which evidence previous signs of use or reworking. So what does this say about the adoption of copper tools? It seems at this time that the axe head had kind of slightly gone beyond being functional items, and perhaps they were more suitable for display and deposition. So how do we interpret these changes in the stone tool repertoire, and what does this tell us about the early uptake of copper in Cyprus? Well, firstly, it is fair to argue that copper and stone tools were intimately connected. As well as being found together, copper objects are deposited in similar ways to stones. Alongside forms, overlaps occur in where new materials are coming from, and in all-over grinding, which may be likened to the removal of sprues from casting on copper objects. However, many of these overlaps also echo trends within the Middle Chalcolithic ornamental industry. The geometric forms of some stone adzes and axes indicate that attempts were made to emulate the form of copper tools. This is particularly true of flanged objects, which have been found at Lemba-Lacus, but also from the survey of late Chalcolithic Calabasas and Bolis. However, a trend for geometric forms is seen more widely within the adze and axe industry at this time. This wider trend likely emerges from the new crafting techniques discussed, with flaking, splitting, and intensive grinding leading to the creation of thinner tools with flatter facets. Did these copper objects come to cohere with those made from stone? Rather than reflecting a straightforward emulation and replacement of stone with copper, a more reciprocal process seems to be at work, which is situated within wider intra-Cypriot changes. Instead of reducing when copper is first encountered, the greatest elaboration of stone technologies occurs on the island. At this juncture, brownstone tools are the most abundant, intensely crafted, and well-formed. This is seen in adzes and axes, but also pestles, which have no copper counterparts. Novel materials and techniques were used within the stone industry, and this novelty was perhaps legitimized through their use in communal events. This created a milieu of openness to the novel, which likely encouraged the use of the novel material copper and contact making with copper using communities and those on the mainland. Alongside making new contacts, communal events and shared techniques perhaps acted to ease old social ties and create a Chalcolithic identity in the face of the novel. Furthermore, we don't see adoption of an entire copper industry from the mainland. Rather, we witness the selective incorporation of object types that were already significant for Chalcolithic people. Copper is incorporated into pre-existing traditions in a similar way to stone. The rest of this talk will outline Bronze Age developments, and as you will see, grindstone edge tools are not completely replaced. So, do we see a completely new industry from the start of the Bronze Age period in Cyprus? Firstly, from the Philia period onward, a handful of new but relatively rare grindstone tool types appear on the island. Some of these are related to copper, including molds, which indicate the casting of copper objects. We also find ring hammers, hafted on a wooden shaft and utilized for percussion on the periphery. These have been found in mining and copperworking contexts. However, one was also recovered from one of the tombs at Dania, so these objects were also likely used more broadly for cutting soft bedrock. The most numerous new tool type to be recovered consists of whetstones, which were used to sharpen blades of copper-based objects. These are commonly found as grave goods and likely represent personal objects used in the maintenance of copper tools by their owners. Other rare tool types also occur. Two new types of hafted hammer are found, one hafted in a similar way to the ring hammer and another likely utilized within a withy haft. These likely relate to new indirect techniques of chert napping involving a punch. Furthermore, new grooved braiders occur from the EC3 period, Early Cypriot 3 period onwards. These are unlike the shaft straighteners of the pre-pottery Neolithic, as they have V-shaped instead of U-shaped grooves. These were for sharpening different types of point, including needles and pins made from bone and copper. They are likely related to changes in the textile industry, but also to the sharpening of copper-based objects. These novel tools have some mainland parallels, which can be described as indirect, meaning that tools of similar function exist, but that they diverge in terms of their form or crafting, or direct, meaning that these tools share other biographical aspects. As can be seen, these first occur in different periods of the early Bronze Age. Furthermore, they find parallels across different areas of Southeast and East Anatolia, Israel, and Jordan. These observations within the stone industry echo other novel things in the Philia period in that they suggest contact with different mainland communities. Akin to other materials from the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age, parallels are particularly seen with Tarsus in Southeast Anatolia. However, the full range of tools typical from contemporary periods at Tarsus are not present within the Cypriot assemblage. These include perforated axes, adzes, hoes, heavier hammers, picks, grooved and toggled whetstones, scale weights, arrowhead, and typical shaft strainers. This suggests a selective adoption of mainland types. Furthermore, pottery of the Chalcolithic period have also been recovered from Tarsus, suggesting that contacts with the site led to bidirectional influences, at least in earlier periods. Lastly, these new types don't occur across Cyprus simultaneously, but move slowly from the north and east to the south and west. This is best explained as being spread slowly by intra-island mechanisms of exchange. Let's take a closer look at the industries at our Bronze Age case study sites. Starting with late Philia to early Cypriot period Marchialonia in central Cyprus. Here we see a grindstone industry that is quite distinct from the Chalcolithic of southwest Cyprus. Many of the previously outlined new tool types are found at the site. Furthermore, the frequency of tools recovered differ considerably. Firstly, no chisels are recovered, and a very small percentage of adzes and axes are found. In contrast, the most frequent category of grindstone tool are those of grinding function, and instead of the other grinding sets being well represented, as they are in the Chalcolithic period, grinding set 1, consisting of the large rubbers operated on saddle-type querns, are by far the most popular. Opposite to the Chalcolithic period, Mortars are much more frequent than pestles, and only one formal multi-use hammerstone grinder was identified at the site. Despite these differences, this industry is not presently recognizable as being transplanted from a specific area of the mainland. From my research thus far, the most common type of grinding setup on the Anatolian mainland consists of loaf-shaped rubbers utilized on top of saddle perns, but these do not have the overhanging terminal typical of those from Cyprus, and they may have been held centrally rather than at the ends. Akin to the new tool types, there's no clear homeland for these changes. The most similar comparanda comes not from the mainland, but from the Chalcolithic period of Cyprus. Other than the 4 new tool types, all other tool classes and types are found in the Chalcolithic period. This includes adzes, axes, pestles, mortars, grinding sets of all 3 types, the same types of percussive tools in similar frequencies, and some overlaps also occur in finer abrasive tools. Furthermore, the grinding tools from both contexts are largely manufactured in similar ways. If this new tool industry was brought from the mainland, these results suggest that it may have already merged with Chalcolithic traditions. The grindstone tools analysed from early Cypriot to middle Cypriot period Cassoniga in southwest Cyprus reflect a completely different picture from Marchialonia. Here we see a slower development whereby tool frequencies from the early Cypriot period are more in line with Chalcolithic industries than Marchi. It is only in the later phase of the site that new tool types, such as hafted hammers, grooved abraders, and whetstones are found, and the frequencies are more in line with Marchi. Saying this, differences do occur from the earlier phases. For example, more of the grinding tools from Cassoniga are of grinding set 1, akin to Marchi. However, grinding set 2, operated with small handheld stones, is also popular. Chisels are all but absent from the start of the Bronze Age here, suggesting that these had gone out of use or been replaced by copper versions. However, adzes and axes seem to continue in use. Several complete and usable adzes and axes of types at home in the Chalcolithic period are found deposited on early floors. Alongside indicating that these tools continued in use, this may also echo deposition traditions of the Chalcolithic period. Franklin Webb suggests that Cassoniga may have been less influenced by Philia changes due to this site being far from the area in which Philia migrants arrive. But we could equally see this as the capacity of a community to engage with novel things as and when they felt it appropriate. Moving on to the other sites in the north of the island, the tools from the Philia period site of Ellon offer an interesting collection of objects. The industry here is very Chalcolithic. The most popular tool category are edge tools, including adzes and axes of identical types to the Chalcolithic period. Furthermore, and most telling, is that one axe has an incision on the side akin to the examples from the southwest Chalcolithic, centrally there. Notably, these have only been found in the Chalcolithic period on the south coast and in Philia sites in the north. In addition, this collection contains a pestle and no mortars. Few grinding tools are recovered, and these are not of the popular rubber and quern configuration that occurs at Marchialonia, and typical Chalcolithic multi-use tools are also found. Furthermore, a jar fragment and the stopper lid have parallels in the middle Chalcolithic. It makes more sense to see this as a Chalcolithic site which adopts Philia-style pottery. Moving on to Queen Econo-Arasi, this is a survey site which has sherdage dating to the Philia to early Cypriot period. However, as no other periods were identified at the site, we can take these objects as relatively closely connected to activities of this date. Here we have a similar industry to Ellon and the Chalcolithic sites. A relatively high frequency of edge tools are found, and again, one axe bears an incised marking typical of the Chalcolithic period. In addition, a relatively high frequencies of pestles occur and no mortars. However, a high frequency of grinding tools were also recovered. Most of the grinding tools can be compared to those of grinding set 1. They are smaller than tools usually found of this type, but they have use in line with this type and are crafted to shape in a similar way. Perhaps we have changes in the industry towards something like the Marchi industry, but overall this industry has many Chalcolithic elements. Unfortunately, few settlement sites of early Cypriot date were available for analysis from the north of the island. we can perhaps suggest that a handful of survey sites had an industry that is more in line with Marquis. These include 2 sites at Dicomo and 1 at Pilleri. Grinding tools from these sites were very abundant, were the most frequent, and they are mainly of grinding set 1. These could indicate that stone industries change between the Philia and Early Cypriot periods. However, these sites produce very small collections of groundstone tools, and their allocation to the EC rather than later Bronze Age phases is not certain. Looking at cemetery sites of the Early Cypriot period, the most common tool types recovered are whetstones. However, there is a group of tombs at Lapithos that have typical Chalcolithic tools. These include 11 stone axes. Unfortunately, these objects were not available for analysis. In the case of these axes, it is not clear if they represent funerary offerings or if they are reused in tomb cutting. The richness of copper in the cemetery argues against this, reflecting a revival in response to a lack of copper. However, 2 type 5 pestles akin to those found in the Chalcolithic period are also deposited in these tombs, which perhaps supports that what we are looking at is a group who retained Chalcolithic traditions. I lastly want to briefly mention the Early Cypriot site of Souter Kamenodia. This site was included only in secondary analysis. However, the industry here does not look similar to the Bronze Age, to the Chalcolithic period, or to the Bronze Age from Marquis. And this could indicate the presence of a different regional tradition in the South Central Coast region. So in conclusion, a much more messy and complicated picture is highlighted. It is possible that stone chisels were replaced by those made from copper as they reduce over the late Chalcolithic and are rarely found in the Bronze Age. In contrast, other stone tool types fluoresce and continue in later periods, at least in some areas of Cyprus. In the Chalcolithic period, it is likely that a reciprocal process was taking place whereby stone influenced copper and copper influenced stone. I've suggested that interesting copper versions likely emerged due to the growing social significance of stone counterparts and an openness to the novel that was encouraged through related social processes. The novelty of new properties that copper offered perhaps led to the introduction of aspects of copper to the stone industry. Conversely, select copper objects were added to long-standing traditions of stone deposition. When we enter into the Bronze Age, instead of a cohesive industry, we see very varied collections across Cyprus. Although new tool types are seen with mainland parallels, they implicate different areas of the mainland. Other than whetstones, these stone types are also very rare and seem to spread slowly from the north and east to the west and south. Overall, my study has shown that change was piecemeal, occurring from the Chalcolithic and through the Bronze Age at different rates in different areas of the island. Select elements were incorporated from different mainland areas. Although increased movement to and from the mainland is probable, this pattern suggests that groups in Cyprus were at least some of the time active in coordinating mainland contacts. In recent papers, similar or aligned arguments have been made concerning this period. Who suggests that contacts with the early Transcaucasian groups from the Chalcolithic could have facilitated later contacts with those of the Anatolian trade network. Whereas Lautari and Muti have also highlighted that changes in the Philia period in copper objects, textiles, and ceramics have a longer history, and the elements were selectively incorporated over a longer period. Similar regional traditions in clay mixes occur between the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age period, and Muti has promoted understanding the Chalcolithic in Cyprus as a period when populations were particularly open to the novel. This talk has shown a complex picture of life in Cyprus, but connections with the mainland within the stone tool industry are not well known. So I would love to go and do that next. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you for your time and your wonderful, the wonderful year at CAARI that I've just spent here. Dig directors in the Department of Antiquities. So we'll get to that bit.
Super interesting. And does any